Homeowners, is your boiler on the blink? Does your roof leak? The Burlington Home Improvement Program provides low and no-interest loans for these and other repairs. If you're a low to moderate income homeowner in the Old North End, King Street, Lakeside, or Chase Street neighborhoods, you can get additional information about the Home Improvement Program by contacting the Community and Economic Development Office at City Hall, 658-9300, extension 197.
You may know how to read, but is it enjoyable? Have you had the pleasure of opening a good book, keeping up with your local affairs, sharing what you've learned with your friends or with your children? If you're missing out, you don't have to. Learn to read for enjoyment. Find out what's going on and make up your own mind. Join the A-Team for New Readers at the Fletcher Free Library. Call 863-8307 today. Read and take off.
Hello, my name is Peter Burns. On Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 and 8 p.m., I'm going to be leading a tour through the Fletcher Free Library. We'll start at the circulation desk, the heart of the library. We'll see how books are circulated through our community, read and returned. We'll move on to the local history room and explore the library and its relation to the history of Burlington. And then on to the children's room, where we'll talk about the first books we read and how important books are to us as adults and how important they were as children. I'd like you to come along. It's free, and it leaves at 7 and 8 p.m. This tour is made possible by a grant from the Mayor's Arts Council. Thank you.
Achieving our potential as individuals and as a community is possible only with hard work and dedication to worthy goals and objectives. The maintenance of our streets and roads, parks, removal of snow and ice, and the smooth functioning of public water, sewage, and refuse removal systems are easily taken for granted. During National Public Works Week, this week, May 17th through 23rd, let's remember the public works people who work so hard to make all these things possible.
I'd like to welcome you all to the Tri-State Housing Conference and the Equinox Inn. We've been blessed with beautiful weather, which is going to hold through Friday. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Bernard Sanders, Mayor of Burlington. Always politically active, Mayor Sanders was first elected Mayor of Burlington in 1981, staging a startling upset victory. He was the first independent elected in the city history. Since then, he has been re-elected 3 times and is currently serving his 4th term. In 1986, Mayor Sanders ran for governor as a third-party candidate, receiving a respectable 15% of the vote. During his 6 years in office, Mayor Sanders has opened up the political process, creating many innovative programs. He has emerged as a spokesman for low-income interests and has been a particularly effective spokesman for affordable housing, both in the state and nationally. This time, I'd like to introduce Mayor Sanders.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you very much for inviting me. And let me begin by echoing one of the remarks made by Mr. Barry, and that is that many of you are unsung heroes and heroines who very often, against overwhelming odds, especially in the last few years, have been trying to do your best to protect the dignity of low-income people who I think we will all agree are entitled to live in decent and safe housing. And I think you have often not gotten the credit that you deserve, so I congratulate you. And I thank you for inviting me here, because I think in inviting me, you're not really, as nice as Joanne's remarks were, you're not really inviting me, but perhaps you're talking about a community itself, the city of Burlington, Vermont, which through the efforts of many, many people has in fact embarked on some of the more innovative programs in New England, and has in fact stood up and fought as hard as we can fight, and will continue to fight, for the rights of low and moderate income people in a number of areas, certainly including housing. And I'd like to tell you a little bit in a moment about what we have done, and I'd like to also touch upon some ideas that we have for what a progressive state government might be interested in doing. But before I get to those points, I think the main point that I would like to make today is that essentially it would be a mistake to look at the housing crisis which exists in this country and in this region separate from the overall political situation which is going on in America. The housing crisis is not just a housing crisis. What we are talking about, and let's be very clear about this, what we are talking about is a system of priorities in our nation and in our various states. And if we don't understand that, and we don't be honest and blunt about that, we're really going to miss the forest from the trees. Okay? Somebody, and a group of people in the nation's capital, have said that it is the American policy, that it is the position of the United States government to spend $300 billion a year on military spending, that it is the position of the United States government to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to go to war against an innocent people in Central America, and at precisely the same time, having made that statement, they have also said that it is the policy of the United States government to make radical and drastic cutbacks in a wide range of areas affecting the needs of low and moderate income people, and especially in housing. There is no housing crisis. There is a crisis in the federal government's relation to low and moderate income people. If money is not going to be put into low and moderate income housing by the federal government or by the state government, you are going to have a housing crisis. So while we all have got to talk about how we can do this and how we can do that and how we deal with 100 different problems that low-income housing brings forth, let us not forget for one moment that the root cause of the housing crisis in this nation is a system of priorities which says that we will give tax breaks to wealthy people, we will encourage the building of expensive condominiums, we will allow the production of all kinds of products, whether or not they are useful or productive, but we will damn well not put money into low and moderate income housing. That's the root cause of the problem. And if you forget that, I think we're going to be going off in the wrong direction. And I think it's also important to understand that the housing crisis is related in a whole political sense to what's going on in this country. And I'm going to tell you things that some of you may be unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with. But it's important that we understand that, this fact, if we are concerned about the issue of affordable housing. It's important to understand why poor people have no voice. For example, as somebody who ran for governor of the state of Vermont, I went through many housing projects in our state, all over the state. And you know what? Poor people don't vote. Do you know that? Not only in low-income housing projects, but outside. Half of the American people have given up on the political process and don't vote. The overwhelming majority of those are low and moderate income people. I would be interested to see statistics about the number of poor people from the low-income housing projects who vote. If you're talking about 20%, I will be surprised. We have done better in Burlington, but I think it's fair to say that poor people have been so pushed aside, they no longer see any reason, and the system does not provide them with reasons to participate in the political process. The needs of low and moderate income people are not going to be heard unless they become part of the process. Until they begin to stand up, not just within the low-income housing projects, but all over America and say, America, we don't have the resources to spend more and more on nuclear weaponry or go to war against Nicaragua. What we need in the United States is decent health care, decent housing, decent public transportation, and a dozen other things, all of which have been cut back by the federal government. So once again, the issue of housing is not a different issue than transportation. Next week I'll be speaking before a transportation group, and they have the same exact problems as you are. And tonight I'll be talking to a group, in fact, in Burlington that's concerned about the issue of health care, and they have exactly the same problem as you have. And it is important for all of us who are concerned about the needs of low and moderate income people to form alliances, to work with people who have other concerns, and to stand up tall and try to reverse the priorities in this nation. It is an absolute disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace that in a country with the potential that we have, with the wealth that we have millions of people living out on the streets, that there have been radical cutbacks in federal funding for low and moderate income housing. And we've got to stand up and make that fight. And that's a political fight, and we've got to be very clear about that. What can a city do? Okay, given the reality that the federal government has told us that housing is not one of their priorities, they're too busy waging war, what are we going to do? What can we do? Well, for a start, I think the first thing that we have to do is stand up bold and say there is a housing crisis, and local government and state government have got to address that crisis. Now, one of the things about crisis, a word which is in the newspapers every other day, there is not a crisis until somebody says there is a crisis. Okay? That's a very important fact. In the state of Vermont, there is not a housing crisis because state government has not told us that there is a housing crisis. Between you and me, there is a housing crisis. But until the state government throughout America tells us that there are a housing crisis, we will not begin to address the problem. So the first thing we have to do is recognize what the problem is. Now, the fact that we have millions of people sleeping out on the streets is an issue that has recently received some attention, and in fact, presumably the federal government will put a minuscule amount of money into that problem. But there are crises even more severe, less dramatic, but more severe. When I was a kid, many, many years ago, they used to talk about the appropriateness of how much a family should put into housing. Okay, average working class family, and at that point, they were talking about 25% of a family's income should go into housing. Now, whom do we know? Low-income people, middle-income people who can get away with putting 25% of their income into housing, and that used to include utilities as well. You're talking about a situation where many, many families in my city, in Burlington, throughout the state of Vermont, and in your communities are putting 30, 40, 50% of their income in housing. And how do you live, and how do you do the other things you want to do for your family when you're putting 50% of your income in housing? So I think the first thing that I could tell you is that in Burlington, unlike many other communities, unlike many other states, we have said there is a housing crisis. We don't know how we can solve it. We know that it's very expensive. We probably can't do much more than dent the surface on the problem, but we're going to recognize that there is a problem, and we're going to communicate to other people, to our people, and we're going to do the best that we can. So what do? What does one city do? For a start, it works as hard as it can to get the limited federal resources that we can get. And in fact, in Burlington, we have been successful, and we thank those people who have made it possible. We received a $3 million grant, more or less, for our 2 family low-income housing projects, which will mean a great deal to those people. That housing is not in good shape. It is getting old, and the fact that we're going to be rehabbing that means a lot to those people. They're going to see an improvement, a significant improvement in the quality of their life. Second of all, we have put together a very fine economic development office, and they have gone out and brought in a HODAG grant, which allowed us to have some 40 units of affordable housing in a housing development project, and that was important to us. So we have been aggressive in trying to bring in federal money that we can use. Second of all, what we have done is come up with a number of ordinances in our city to protect low and moderate income people and to encourage affordable housing. Probably the most important area that we have been moving, and sometimes with success and sometimes not with success, is the whole concept of linkage, which I know that many of you are familiar with. And essentially, it seems to me that if the federal government is pulling back from public housing, if state governments, in some cases, are getting involved well, in our state, not terribly well, but it is appropriate. Who are you going to look to? Let me just change and say, if the feds don't do it and the state doesn't do it, and the cities and towns, having lost revenue sharing and everything else, they're not capable of doing it, who's going to do it? Where do you go? Well, I think one area that you certainly look to is the private sector. And you look to them in this way. You say to them, and this is the case in our area, this is the case in the state of Vermont, You say you are coming in to areas of the state like here, and you are building expensive condominiums. You are building very expensive housing. And in fact, if you have money in Vermont, in many other communities, of course, there is not a housing crisis, by the way. If you've got a couple of $100,000 for a nice condo, there is no crisis. What is the responsibility of a local community given that reality? And I think it's appropriate for the local community to say to the private development people, you are not building affordable housing because you don't make enough money on it. You're building expensive housing. Well, that's okay. If you want to build expensive housing, go for it. But you know what? X percentage of the housing that you build has got to be affordable as well. Okay, and that's a concept called inclusionary zoning. And the power that a local government has, or the power that a state government has, is that it can say, we aren't going to give you the permission to build your affordable housing and to make a lot of money unless you take the social responsibility to build affordable housing. Now, we don't have legislation to that effect in Burlington. In fact, we were unable to get the political support that we needed to pass it. In Burlington, we have a three-party city. We're the only three-party city in America, and the Democrats and Republicans would not support us on this, and we didn't get the votes. But what we have done is negotiated with a private developer who wanted to build expensive condos, and in fact, we had 40 very attractive units of affordable housing built, and we forced that situation, and we will continue to do that. So all over this state, what you are seeing is a phenomenon, not only the state, New England, America, where developers are coming in, building expensive housing, and simultaneously what's going on is there are a lot of low-income jobs, okay? New jobs are being created, which are service industry jobs, expensive housing, low-income jobs. What's the story? And I think the answer has got to be to demand developers to start building affordable housing if they're going to build expensive housing as well. We have in Burlington proposed an anti-speculation tax. One of the problems and one of the reasons that rents are soaring up is that developers, individuals are coming in, buying and selling housing, making a quick profit, putting a coat of paint on it and doubling their profits within a few years' time. It's a hot market. Vermont is a pretty hot market. We have proposed a very sharp tax on those people who make heavy profits and sell their property within the next 2 years. In all probability, the Vermont State Legislature will not allow us to do that. The City of Burlington has also passed a strong condo conversion bill. We have a very serious problem in Vermont. I know in many of your communities where large projects that were received low-income federal loans 20 or 25 years ago are now coming due. And in Vermont, we have, I think, 2 or 3 of those, including one in Burlington called Northgate. And we have over 300 units of housing that, in a certain period of time, could be left to the open market, and large numbers of working-class families will be displaced. But we intend to do our best to prevent that. Among other things, we have passed a condo conversion law in Burlington, which will prevent that project from being converted into condos. It will not, at the moment, allow it to go into open rental structures. And we are doing our best to work with a number of agencies to come up with a program as to how we can buy that project and convert it perhaps into a co-op. In the City of Burlington, we have a stock of housing which is old. And unlike those good old days in the 50s, when cities knocked down God knows how many units of low and moderate income housing, much of it was not all that bad. So-called slum clearance, we in Burlington do not knock down old housing. And what we in fact are doing is spending very substantial sums of money in rehabbing that housing through a very successful housing improvement loan program. And that's been working very well. We have also developed, in terms of the crisis of how you keep housing affordable. How do you keep housing affordable? On one hand, we know that you've got to build housing. On the other hand, you don't want to see rents double every few years. And in fact, rents, as you know, in New England are soaring. One of many solutions, and one solution that we have been working on, is the concept of a community land trust. And I think Burlington was one of the few communities in America to have put significant sums of money, for us, we don't have a lot of money, but significant sums of money into a community land trust, which essentially is, through a nonprofit organization, buying property and then leasing it back forever to families who want to stay with that. And that has been successful. Recently, we made a major breakthrough in something that I'm very proud of. We had our Burlington City employees' retirement system, which now has some $25 or so million in it. We had them put $1 million into the land trust. Worked out a rather complicated legal agreement which protects their interest of getting a decent rate of return, but will give the land trust in the city of Burlington $1 million to continue its efforts to purchase affordable housing. Let me simply conclude my remarks by saying this. There is a housing crisis in Vermont, in my city, in your states, and throughout the United States of America. The bottom line is that the people who make the decisions in our country, the people who control the Congress, the White House, the people who control private capital, are not particularly concerned about that crisis. We have got to make them concerned. We have got to work with people in the low-income housing projects, people in the communities, to demand that housing become an issue that is addressed. If adequately funded, we can solve the problem of affordable housing. We have got to put pressure on our state governments. In some states, Massachusetts for one, are beginning to move in the right direction. Many other states are not. We have got to raise that cry that there is a housing crisis and money has got to be invested in housing. In the local area, there are a number of tools, zoning regulations, using the basic power of the city to put pressure on private developers which can force the creation of more affordable housing. It is in many ways a difficult time because of the change in federal priorities. The issue of housing and decent housing is as important one as exists. And I simply hope that if we all work together in a dozen different areas that we have to, we can begin to deal effectively with that problem. Thank you very much.
Let me open up our panel session by calling on James Rader, a board member of the National Coalition for the Homeless.
Thank you, Ken. Good afternoon. I want to leave you today with three fairly simple ideas. One is that homelessness is indeed a crisis. It's a crisis in Vermont, especially in Burlington. It's a crisis in every New England state, and it's a crisis throughout the United States. And as Ken alluded to, it's pretty hard to overlook that, particularly in recent years, because it has increased in its proportions. So first of all, homelessness is a crisis, a very real crisis. Second, that homelessness is a housing problem. It may seem obvious, it may seem too obvious to mention, but it is indeed a housing problem. And finally, that the solutions to this problem are going to require new and original and bold approaches that only a few years ago, many of them would have been considered radical, and a lot of people who are thinking about those solutions now would not have given them serious consideration only a few years ago. There has been a lot of attention to what can be called the numbers game around homelessness. I guess that anytime you get a major crisis, the numbers game starts. And the estimates of a few years ago ranged anywhere from 250 to 350,000, which was the range of estimates made by HUD and by Health and Human Services in a couple of studies done at the federal level, to estimates more on the order of 3 million made by some of the organizations, including the National Coalition for the Homeless, of the scope of the problem nationwide. Just briefly, what that's all about, obviously it depends on what your agenda is, how high you want your estimate to be. It also depends a lot on how you define homelessness. It depends, if you're doing a study, it depends on what time of day you try to do a count, and do you count people who are in shelters, and only people who come to shelters, and how do you go about identifying people who are homeless, and how do you go about defining what homelessness is? I like Bob Hayes, who started the National Coalition for the Homeless. I like his comment on the numbers game. He says that we'll never know how many homeless people there are until we supply enough shelter beds to take care of all of them, and then we'll know. Who is homeless? I think most people who operate shelters will give you some rough estimates of the makeup of the population. that approximately a third of the population are people who have serious drug or alcohol problems, and this is one of the more visible parts of the population to most people who encounter the problem on the streets of our cities. About another third are people who have serious psychiatric problems of mental illness or mental retardation. The problem has been increasing in recent times. A study last year by the National Conference of Mayors, actually in December of this past year, estimated that in 1986, based on a survey of 25 cities, every city but one reported an increase in the number of homeless people they were seeing on their streets, and the average increase was 20%. The greatest increase reported was in the number of homeless families, and more that's being seen as a major part of the problem. I said that homelessness is a housing problem. There are a lot of causes that have been identified, and it's, I think, not a coincidence that these problems began to be seen, or the great increase, an increase of 2 to 3 to 4 times in the population seen on the streets of our cities around 1981, 1982. And some of the causes that have been identified correlate with the changes that took place at the federal level at that time. It's interesting that since 1981, there's been a 70%, as probably everybody in this room is well aware, a 70% cut in the amount of funding put into housing from the federal level. But there have also been cuts in almost all of the entitlement programs. There have been tightening recently, I'm happy to say, some loosening up of requirements for entitlement programs, but as you all know, there was a tightening down, and a lot of people who had formerly been able to get assistance weren't able to get assistance. The recent legislation, I want to talk briefly about legislation in a moment, was to take away the requirement for a permanent address in order to get things like food stamps and veterans benefits. It's kind of ironic that many of the people, a significant part of the population on the street, for example, are veterans, and that until this legislation passed last year, that a person had to have a permanent address in order to receive those benefits. So as you can see, it was sort of a dead-end trap. If one had to have the address before you could get the benefits, and you couldn't get the address without the money. I said homelessness is a housing problem. It's a lack of enough units, as you all know. It's the fact that units are torn down and they are not being replaced at anywhere near the rate they need to be. It's also a problem in what is affordable, as rents go up, and as for many people, the benefits they can get go down. The result is that people who need housing can't afford it. Now, that's not to say that the only solutions to the problem are housing solutions. I'm reminded of a woman who works in a day program in New York City, who says that in that day program, one of the things they have to do is to teach the skills of indoor living, that we have people on the streets who have, in effect, forgotten how to live indoors. They have to relearn that skill. But I think there's a myth out there, a popular view of homeless people that sort of romanticizes people on the street and portrays them as being on the street by some kind of choice. That's not to say that no one ever makes a voluntary choice to live that lifestyle, but the vast majority of people who are on the street do not. And even those people who do, you have to look at it in the context of in the face of what forces do they make that choice. I'd like to say just a word about the National Coalition for the Homeless. It started in 1983. It grew out of the work of an attorney mentioned before named Bob Hayes. He was an attorney on Wall Street, and he encountered the problem daily as he went to and from work. on the streets of New York City. He got interested, he got involved, and eventually got involved as an attorney in some of the lawsuits that happened in New York City around the right to shelter and around fights with the city over providing shelter. Out of that grew the New York Coalition for the Homeless, and then so many calls, so much need nationally came in that the National Coalition was formed. We now have board members in about 40 states, and one of our most active areas that we've been involved in the last year or two has been national legislation. Last year there was an omnibus bill called the Homeless Persons Survival Act, and pieces of that, including the pieces I alluded to before, did get passed. This year some pieces came back called the Urgent Relief for the Homeless Act, and that's before Congress right now. It passed the Senate a week or two ago by, I believe, about 85 to 12. Unfortunately, the appropriations bill that went through the Senate Appropriations Committee last week left out $225 million of the appropriation to implement that bill. And the sections that were left out, according to a call I made late last week to Senator Leahy's office, it was by oversight. I've not determined yet whether that's true or not, but anyway, it's not in there. Those happen to be the pieces that have to do with housing. It's an emergency shelter grants section, it's a transitional housing section, and a Section 8 part of the bill. $225 million, I believe about 2/3 of the funding of the Senate bill was left out in the appropriations bill. So if any of you have an open line to your senator, now is a good time to let them know that those housing solutions to this problem are urgently needed. I'd just like to close by pointing out a book that just was published last month. The first, as far as I know, the first book for the popular market that deals with homelessness in a comprehensive way. It's an excellent book, and it'll probably be in your bookstore soon. It's called The Faces of Homelessness. So if you're interested in learning more about this problem on a national level, I strongly recommend this book. I'd like to close by saying a word about Burlington, where I work and where I became involved in this problem in about 1981, 1982. And as I say, that was the time that people across this country at the local level began to see and to respond to a great increase in the numbers of homeless people. A meeting was held in 1982. About 45 people from the city of Burlington showed up, and it was a real community response, a real private response to the problem. Committee on Temporary Shelter grew out of that meeting, and we were very lucky to have a man who came to that meeting, a private citizen who cared very deeply about the problem, who became involved first as a volunteer, and now, since its inception, has been the director of the Committee on Temporary Shelter, and that's Mike Cunningham, and happy to turn the microphone over to him.
I'd also like to thank you for inviting me here. I wasn't always the director of the Committee on Temporary Shelter. As a matter of fact, in November of 1981, I was director of marketing of a business organization. And the day before Thanksgiving Eve, my boss took me to lunch and told me what a great team player I was, how much he appreciated me, the terrific job I was doing. And I thanked him and went on and had a nice Thanksgiving. And Christmas and New Year's, I returned to work the day after New Year's, after that holiday, and he told me, in spite of what I had been doing, he wouldn't need my services anymore. So I found myself unemployed. Now, when you're unemployed, you do have a little bit more time on your hands. And one of the men in my church mentioned to me that he heard that there was a homeless family in Burlington, and would I go and represent the church and see if there's anything that we could do as a group of people to help them out. Well, I went to that meeting. Like Jim said, it was over at City Hall. I don't know if he mentioned that. And it wasn't an ordinary meeting. It was nothing like I had ever expected before. Actually, it started off as a press conference. And there was an awful lot of television lights there and cameras and reporters and what have you. And I stayed. And this is the first time I ever met this man, Jim Rady. He's the city clerk of City Hall. And we've become good friends since then. He chaired that meeting, and he chairs a fantastic meeting. He's also got an awful lot of energy and a lot of persistence. And he's done a lot to help to alleviate the suffering of the homeless in Burlington. We got together at that meeting, and after the media left, a group of us stayed, and we formed what we call a steering committee. And I think it was in about a week or perhaps 10 days that we were able to open a temporary emergency shelter at a place called the Sarah Holbrook Community Center. We got it. It didn't cost us anything. The director of it let us have it for nothing. We staffed it with volunteers. We had 2 unpaid directors. I was the food and volunteer coordinator. We opened at 7 o'clock in the evening, and we closed at 7 o'clock the following morning. And we operated that for a 10-week period. We had a couple of problems, but for the most part, the thing really worked, and the homeless came to us, and we were able to provide shelter for these people. We closed on the 1st of May. We agreed to get together again on the 15th of October, which we did to reassess the situation. I might mention this. Originally, we were known as the Mayor's Emergency Shelter. Mayor Sanders helped us out an awful lot, and he still does to this day, and we're very grateful for his help. But the initials of that, if you think of it, spell mess, and we didn't think that was too cool, so we changed the name to the Burlington Emergency Shelter. And we closed the 1st of May, and one of the directors went around the corner, and he had his idea of how a shelter ought to be run, and with our blessings, he took the name of the organization, and it's now known as the Burlington Emergency Shelter, and it still exists, and they're doing a real good job. We came together again. Jim called us. It was another meeting over the first floor conference room at City Hall. We got together there, and people from the community again came forward and said there really is a need for another shelter. They only had 13 beds in there, and there were still people that were sleeping on the streets. We became known at that point as the Committee on Temporary Shelter, and we agreed to open it again for for 30 days. We're going to try it for a 30-day period to see if there really was that need. And we were able to open it on Christmas Eve. I might add that I was still out of work. And if anyone would have told me that I would be doing anything like this, I wouldn't have believed them. I mean, going from director of marketing to director of, Committee on Temporary Shelter, it's quite a career change and something I never planned, but I might add that it's something I really enjoy very, very much, and I've never been happier in all my life. We opened that. They made me we were co-directors. I got down there on Christmas Eve, and nobody came. We had volunteers, and nobody came to our shelter. And I drove the volunteers home at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was a little nervous. But the next day, the police brought one man, and then they kept coming, and kept coming, and coming. And we closed on the 28th of April. We closed on the 15th of April, and that Saturday morning, I put 28 homeless people out into the streets again. And that particular day, shortly after that, we had the largest single snowfall of the season. Now, we had 2 winters under our belt, and a certain amount of momentum had been built from this energy. And our board decided to see if they could keep me on, and we agreed to a person that there really was a need for a permanent year-round shelter. We didn't want to be doing this every weekend, every winter. It really didn't make too much sense. So with the help of the United Way, we got a special projects grant. The Burlington Rotary helped us out. My church helped us out. Private citizens helped us out. And I was able to stay on and search for a location for what we now call the way station. And it took the whole summer and into the fall. Around October of that particular year, now we're in October of 83, we were able to locate a location a block from City Hall, downtown Burlington. And there were certain renovations that we had to take care of before we were able to move in there. We were working with that, but we had to get a building permit. Then you had to go, one person came forward in the city of Burlington. Most people agree there really is a need for an emergency shelter, but no one, you know, some people, one person really objected to having it in her backyard. So we had to go before the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And that would take time before we'd even come to see these people and get on the agenda. Meanwhile, we struck a deal with the Salvation Army, and they allowed us to use their facility at around Thanksgiving time. And this is a very, very busy time of the year for the Salvation Army. And they threw open their doors, and they really were, it wasn't really adequate for what we wanted to do, but they allowed us to use it. We went before the zoning board. We were clearly a permitted use, and I remember Jim telling me that even if they don't let us do it, we're going to do it anyway. And we were going to, but we didn't have to. They let us do it, and they put us on probation, more or less. We had to go back 7 months or 8 months later, and they give us their final stamp of approval. So it took us 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and we went into the present location at the way station on Christmas Eve. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the way station now. It's a permanent year-round emergency shelter for homeless people. We have an open-door policy, and that means that everybody's welcome to stay there, provided they behave themselves, provided they abide by a few simple rules. We have bunk beds in there. We have 40 beds. We open at 6 o'clock in the evening. Curfew is at 7:30. We take the first 38 people. If you've been there the night before, you're going to have to be, you have to be in there before curfew, otherwise we're not going to allow you in. But we will bend. We're very, very flexible. We save 2 empty slots for the referrals. The referrals could be coming from the crisis clinic, the emergency room, the police, businesses, churches, synagogues, or what have you. So we have that. And once you're in for the evening. You can't leave. Well, if you leave, you can leave, but you can't come back in again, with one exception, and we encourage this. And this is for people to attend AA meetings, and we let them go out, and we want them to come back. If they come back drunk, they're not going to get back in that night. We assign chores to the guests. They have to do something, cleaning up and what have you, before they leave. If they don't do their chore, they're not going to get back in that night. In the wintertime, everybody does their chore. When it's a balmy, moonlit night in August, the staff does chores quite often, okay? We have the open door policy, so what kind of people do we have in there? We refer to these people as the people who fall through the cracks in the system, and like Jim said a little while ago, about 1/3 of the people that we have in there are active alcoholics, or recovering alcoholics, or drug addicts, the deinstitutionalized mentally ill, or people who would be in a mental institution if they were still doing that. We have them. We have another group of people that we refer to as troubled youth. These are young people between the ages of 18 and 25 who are rebelling against everything and everyone. Sometimes some of the people that we're dealing with seem to bite the hand that feeds them. Most of the people, however, really appreciate what we are doing there. And we average about 500, last year we averaged 554 different people that came through our doors. Having only 40 bunks, it's obvious that most of these people have moved on. Most of these people are Vermonters. Most of these people are from the Burlington area. We do have some people that come in the summertime. They come in and they don't stay very long. Again, they're all welcome. We meet each person where they're at and for what they are. We see them all, number one, as hurting human beings. And as human beings, they're really special, and they're certainly entitled to shelter. We take time to get to know them, see where they're coming from. And some of them are coming out of some really horrendous home environments. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of our guests. The oldest person we've ever had in there is an 84-year-old man. The youngest person we ever had in there is a couple of 6-week-old babies. We have approximately 20% of the people that are in there are women, all right? Young women or older women or what have you. I can tell you about a 24-year-old boy that came to us at that time, and he was so drunk every night that he wet the bed. He's got over 2 years sobriety now, all right? I can tell you about another guy that this man, he came up to us in the first year. He had been released from the mental institution. He came up to see us on a Friday. They had given him money to use a motel before he could be plugged into the mental health system, but they couldn't do that until Monday. And meanwhile, he's got his money and his cash, and he's up in Burlington. The only problem is he doesn't know how to count. And he goes out and he wants to buy a carton of cigarettes, say, and some chips, and it's $5.86 or whatever, and he puts it down and wants to know if that's enough, and sure. Right? Now, these are some of the people that find themselves homeless. And we had him. He was a little different. And I might say that this job that I do now is a lot different than what I've been doing. I've been in sales all of my life, and I meet some different people. This guy came and one night, and he was really spooky, and he was really upsetting the staff. He demanded to have his vital signs tested. He thought he was dying, and they really didn't know how to handle him. They got him up to the emergency room, and all it was is that we had volunteers coming in with food to feed these people, and Maggie Green, who was the director of the Holbrook Center, had made chili that night, and it was having all sorts of effect on this guy, and he thought he was dying. So we also had a man that came over from Albany, New York. He stayed with us for 3 days. He never said a word to anybody. He left, and he went to a place that we call the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, the northeast corner of Vermont. And he murdered a farmer. He's been tried and convicted, and he's in jail serving time right now. I can also tell you about an older alcoholic, and he's drunk all the time, and most people wouldn't know that he was also mentally retarded because he was always inebriated. He was always drunk. But there's very, very few people that also would know that his older sister was also his natural mother. I throw this stuff out to you. I'd like you just to get an idea of where some of these people are coming from. We do have people who are victims of severe beatings in their families. There's incest in their families. There's alcoholism in their families. And although it doesn't excuse their behavior or their present lifestyle, we can certainly understand why they might get into something like this. We have, again, dealing with the people who fall through the cracks in the system. I remember an alcoholic that we had. This guy was, he was also a paraplegic. He was a raving alcoholic. He was diabetic, and he would take seizures. Right? And he has a catheter in his side, and he's in a wheelchair. And these are the people that we deal with. 5 young people went through another town near Burlington called Winooski. They were in an automobile accident, and the injuries that they sustained weren't severe enough to require hospitalization. The only problem is they didn't have any money. They didn't have any plastic money, and they would wind up in a place like the way station. I can tell you about a young woman that came to us. She's in her mid-30s. She was with us when we first started. She swears that we literally saved her life. She was, like I say, mid-30s. She was with us for 21 days. She had no money. She had no support system. She was all alone. And she tells about leaving the way station in the morning and going to the McDonald's downtown with 36 cents in her pocketbook. And she didn't need that coffee. She just wanted to get in out of the cold and be around so-called normal people. She tells about being hungry, so hungry one day that she saw, when she watched the huge quantities of food that's dumped out on trays. We've all seen this when we go to these fast food places, and how close she came one day to reaching in after that food and taking it out and running out crying. She tells about being embarrassed going on job interviews. She tells because her clothes looks like she slept in them, because she did sleep in those clothes. She talks about the embarrassment that she experienced when there's a pause in the interview, in the conversation, and how embarrassed she is because her stomach starts making all sorts of funny noises because she's hungry. We also have another program. It's called the Street Worker Project, and this is all part of the Committee on Temporary Shelter, or COTS. And these, again, are people who, we have social workers out in the streets meeting people where they're at. 75% of their caseload are people who are not in any emergency shelter environment, but rather they're about to lose their housing for whatever reason. Maybe the building is going to be condemned, or maybe it's because of their lifestyle. I remember our first street worker telling me she went into this room. This woman lived all alone with her cats. She was 86 years old. And she tells about walking into the woman's bedroom, and this frail little woman is in there, and she doesn't have enough up here to brush the roaches off of her face. This is where this woman is at. They tell us about transporting the alcoholic who had half of his nose bitten off by a Labrador Retriever. And this guy isn't even interested in going to the emergency room to have it taken care of. The street workers would also cut through a lot of the bureaucratic red tape and get people the benefits that they're clearly entitled to. I'm not a social worker, I don't know the name of this thing, but there was a young woman, again in her 30s, and she had something that's a terrible fear of going outside. And it got progressively worse in the past 3 years, and she got to the point where it's more and more difficult for her to go to work. And obviously, if you don't go to work, you're probably not going to make any money. If you don't have any money, you're probably not going to be able to pay your rent. You're going to lose your housing. And our street workers intervened here, took her, gained her trust and her respect, and were able to take her down and get her the benefits that she was clearly entitled to. We have I don't want to give you the idea that in the way station anything goes with that open door policy, because it doesn't. We have in the state of Vermont a protective custody law. It's no longer a crime to be publicly intoxicated. But if that individual comes into the shelter and he or she is inebriated to the degree that we feel they're conceivably going to be a danger to themselves or others, we dial 911 and the police will come and remove them. And they'll transport them down to a place called Howard Mental Health, where they may be eligible or may not be eligible to participate in a detox program. If they decline that or they're not eligible, they'll transfer them and lodge them in a drunk tank in the jail, in the correctional center. And it's a small room, and it's lined with cinder block. And there's a door there, a big metal door with a little opening like this and bars on it. And to keep the drunk from going over and kicking that door or spitting it through the bars of the guards or what have you, the cinder block from the first one from the ground, they chain you to the wall. And we've had a guy that, because he also has seizures and also because he's a medical risk, quite often he has not been eligible to be chained to the crummy wall. All right? So we would take this kind of person. And I'll tell you this, thanks to our street workers, he has been living in the community, and he's been there since last August. And that's remarkable for where this man has gone, where he's at. He's got what is known as Korsakoff syndrome, which is a deterioration of the brain. Right? And he's at the point where it's irreversible. It isn't coming back. He has nothing. His money is no good except for booze and cigarettes. And thanks again to what our street workers are doing, this man is living in the community now. I wish I could say he's not drinking anymore. He is, but he's not drinking as he used to be. They got him a pay, they're managing his money, and doing things like this. We also have, the third program that we have is the Wilson Hotel. And it's really not like this place here. So they don't have to, they can relax. We're not in competition with them. But what we have are 24 rooms in there. The building, one part of the building was constructed 177 years ago. And I'm going to show you a picture of it in a little while, if you'd like to watch it. And we're pretty proud of that. We were leasing space from the Wilson Hotel. And we had a 2-year lease, and we were in there about 7 or 8 months, and the owners decided they wanted to sell. And after going through what we had gone through to get this location, we decided, well, maybe we'd want to buy this building. So all we did is, again, we had Jim Rader, and some of us, we got together, and we wanted to give the local bankers an opportunity to do something for the homeless population in Burlington. And we gave them a presentation, and as a result, we got 100% financing, and we were able to buy at a very good, real high interest rate, all right? I mean, they got their money's worth. We were able to buy this building. And like I said, we had 24 rooms in there for low-income men. The rent was $50 a week, plus a $5 refundable key deposit. And that was it. And then we were able to cut a deal with the Vermont Housing Authority, and Joanne will speak about that, where we turned it into SROs. We got some community development block grant money, and we were able to renovate it. And I'd also like to say this, is that we're really pleased with this one, is effective the 1st of February, we made it available, we were able to open our doors in the Wilson to women also. And for the first time since 1941, women are in this place legally, all right? And we're proud of that. Couple of things that we have on the drawing board, like Jim said, homelessness among families is a big problem. And COTS, together with a couple of other organizations up in the Burlington area, are addressing this. And we're talking about a firehouse family shelter for families. The way station, with its open door policy, is clearly not the place for little kids. All right? We want to have a daycare center in there and what have you. Also, talking about a day station. I'd like to talk a little bit now, if I may, about Bernie Sanders. This guy has been terrific. He's the mayor. All right? Now, these guys are pretty busy. Christmas Eve, we're only a block away from City Hall, but he doesn't have to do this. Christmas Eve, this man comes over to the way station and wishes Merry Christmas to our guests and our staff. I think that's pretty nice. Right. I went and I saw Bernie this past winter, and we close, like I say, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they have to go out and they can't come back in again until 6 o'clock in the evening. And it gets cold here in the wintertime. And these people, many of them really aren't welcome anyplace. The library might not want them, the businesses wouldn't want them, the mall wouldn't want them. And I spoke to Bernie, and I told him about it, and I said, we'd like to reopen for 4 hours during the day, at 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And he said, you have my support. And we did have it, and we got it. We were able to open for the first time. So this is one of the things that we're trying to get and do it on a permanent basis. On our staff, we have some real dedicated people that work. At the way station, it might not be unusual to have someone working there who is a recovering alcoholic, someone who in one way or another has been there themselves. We might have someone on our staff who spent some time in the mental institution, who spent some time in the correctional center, and has cleaned their life up and their act up and gotten it together. And now they're really able to empathize with our guests, and also to help them and encourage them to resolve their problems. Our funding, we're a United Way agency. The city helps us out. The state of Vermont helps us out. We get the block grant money, churches and synagogues, service organizations, businesses, and people like you. They all help us. The Committee on Temporary Shelter, what is it? It's people like Jim Rader, Mike McNamara, all right? We have Community Action on our board. We have Vermont Catholic Charities on our board. We've had Salvation Army on our board, Legal Aid, DSW, Howard Mental Health, the hospital, and New England Telephone, some people from industry. And these are real neat people. And every one of them really get involved. It's a good working board. They roll up their sleeves and they get involved. And this is what we've done up in Burlington in response to the homeless population.
Achieving our potential as individuals and as a community is possible only with hard work and dedication to worthy goals and objectives. The maintenance of our streets and roads, parks, removal of snow and ice, and the smooth functioning of public water, sewage, and refuse removal systems are easily taken for granted. During National Public Works Week, this week, May 17th through 23rd, Let's remember the public works people who work so hard to make all these things possible.